start off I want to start off by thanking everyone once again for supporting Food Tank's work. This year has been so successful for Food Tank, and that is because of all of you who are our members and who join and help support this work in a variety of ways. It really means so much to me and Bernard, my co-founder, to have you part of this network, this family of Food Tank members, and for all that you do to help Food Tank continue to grow. And that's by emailing and commenting on articles and giving us ideas and giving us critiques and suggestions. Those are really important as well. So please in 2023 expect a lot of regular programming like we'll have today with author Chloe Sorvino. We want to do more of that in 2023 to sort of engage you and make sure that you are feeling part of this work as much as possible. Before I dive in with Chloe, we have a few quick opportunities for members early next year. And all of you are welcome to attend these events. Please email me at danielle@foodtank.com to get your complimentary ticket. So in January, we're planning programming at the Sundance Film Festival. We are once again co-curating at Chef Dance. The last time we did this at Sundance was right before the pandemic in January of 2020. And this year we're going to be working with Chef Andrew Zimmern to screen his new docuseries, Hope in the Water, that is in collaboration with a lot of great folks, including Jennifer Bushman at Fed by Blue, and really looking at the importance of blue food systems, aquatic systems, and the opportunity that they have for fishers and others who are cultivating different kinds of aquatic foods. In February, Food Tank will be focusing on more educational programming for congressional members and their staffers on Capitol Hill. We'll be working in partnership with Arizona State University Sweetie Center around the issue of hunger in higher education. This is an often overlooked issue that is having a significant impact on how young people are able to continue their studies. So this will be one of many events that we'll be having on Capitol Hill next year, given the way Congress is split. We see this as a really, really important opportunity to leverage bipartisan support on issues around food and agriculture that a lot of Republicans and Democrats and everyone in between can really get around, no matter what side of the aisle that they're on. In March, we're collaborating again at South by Southwest with the HBCU, Houston Tillotson University. This will be in Austin, Texas for a day of programming during the South by Southwest food track. So please join us as our guests for a Food Tank Summit, a food film viewing festival, as well as incredible meals in collaboration with local chefs who, including people like Adrian Lipscomb, we hope, and others who are doing such incredible work to improve food and agriculture systems and the way people produce and consume food. We are also working to establish monthly in-person events, as part of a networking series for Food Tank members in Chicago during the summer of 2023, as well as in New York during the fall of 2023. And I hope we will be able to announce these. We're working on them, trying to get the funding and sort of the infrastructure there. But it's really exciting to me to be able to go back to Chicago, where we had a really great Food Tank Summit this year. That is where Food Tank was founded. And so New York has always been a great opportunity for us in terms of galvanizing our members there and galvanizing the incredible food movement that is there. And we hope to spread to other parts of the country as well. And as you know, we're doing Food Tank Summits in many different states. And, we went to places that we'd never been to before, including Ohio this year and others. So we hope to really, really extend that. I want to congratulate the 10 Food Tank members who won a free signed copy of Chloe's new book, which we'll talk about very soon. A raw deal. They are Patricia Dolish, Corinne Bordeaux, Even Siegel, Derek Nelson, Danielle Todd, Greg Ars, Emily Barron, Joe Rouleau, Holly Anowski, and Jen Peterson. So I'm glad you all get to get a copy of her book. And I want to give a welcome to our newest food tank members who joined this week, including Sandra Boone from Kipster. Thank you. Harvey Grady, Lindsay Gannog, Kathy Tipper, Marlena Malarick, Jane Demir. I'm sorry, butchering everyone's names. Dave Marines, Min Aaron Hopkins, William Bleesh, Meathead Barbecue, and Peter Vick. We're really thrilled to have you. So Food Tank's dear friend Chloe has written an incredible book. Chloe Sorvino, she leads food and agriculture coverage at Forbes. Since joining Forbes in 2015, we've known her for a long time. She has reported on drought-ridden farms in California Central Valley, burnout national forest logged by a timber billionaire, a 100-year-old slaughterhouse business in Omaha, In-N-Out's a secret test kitchen, and many, many really other such insightful articles and so well written and so well researched. Her new book, Raw Deal, Hidden Corruption, Corporate Greed, and the Fight for the Future of Meat, just came out a few days ago on December 6th, and it investigates how our meat system is being upended by a number of different things, including, corporations, the climate crisis, and the limitations of local movements who are challenging the status quo. So I want to thank Chloe for being here. It's so great to have you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so thrilled to discuss anything anyone here wants to talk about. Raw Deal or more.
So Chloe, this is not our first conversation, but I ask this of almost every author who I have on a podcast or I talk to, like in this kind of format. What made you want to write this book right now?
There were such dark days in the pandemic, and through my reporting, I was hearing from billionaires talking to me about how when it's raining gold outside, I'm walking around with buckets. And at the same time was then talking to workers who were scared to go on the line and were being put into harm's way, and talking about how they didn't have chicken in their own freezers. But then also I was then hearing and talking to scientists and reading the studies, devastating climate news just coming out again and again. And I felt like there came a point where I was wondering if I was maybe one of the only people who could really tell that story and weave that all together, and then also address the financial institutions that are really underpinning all of this wealth and power controlled by some of the top meat packers.
And there's a lot of control that's hidden. And I think that's really interesting. Most of us, when we go to the grocery store, we don't kind of understand what's behind the scenes of those like packaged meats, whether it's alternative proteins or the conventional meat products or organic meat products. And I'm wondering if you can talk about sort of that hidden greed and power that we're just like we have no sort of relationship with.
Yeah, this is the book to talk about how Americans have no idea where their meat comes from, and while that's hurting us, it's also making many people rich. And I take in 2020, for example, this catalyzing moment, and the book only really uses it as a catalyst around the introduction. It doesn't go into it further, but in 2020 you had some of the craziest profits these meat packers have ever pulled in. Tyson made $5 billion that year. JBS made $4 billion, huge increases from the years before. And that's just on one side of it, but they were able to amass all of these profits and can retain this control on the industry because of their accumulation of wealth and power over time, and their ability to push out smaller independents and smaller competitors that weren't able to withstand drought or were getting rolled up in an M&A frenzy, thanks to our dear friend Ronald Reagan and his administration and all the judges, antitrust judges that he's appointed that continue to impact how a lot of these mergers never got enough scrutiny or the scrutiny they probably deserved. And so you have the consolidation of wealth and power, but then you also in the book have several stories of different schemes of wage manipulation against chicken industry workers, some of the most vulnerable workers in America. Or you have the crazy corruption schemes of the two billionaires, top shareholders of JBS, and how they use these ill-gotten preferential loans and bribes, and then use that money to acquire iconic meatpacking assets in the US and become a massive player, driving more consolidation in the US just in the past decade. And then you also have several parts of the book that unwrap some of the hundreds of different class actions and lawsuits alleging price fixing across chicken, pork, and beef that have been going on for the past 7 years or so.
Yeah, yeah, it's so sort of mind-blowing. And a lot of what you detailed in the book I knew a little about or knew some about, but it is mind-blowing. And I'm wondering if you can tell this audience that, there's only a handful of companies that, control most of the meat, not just in the United States, but really all over the world.
Yes, we can break it down. So in beef, you have Tyson, you have JBS, you have National, owned by Marfrig, also in Brazil, and you have Cargill. Then you have chicken, Pilgrim's Pride, which is backed mostly by JBS too. You have Tyson, you have Cook Foods and Purdue fighting it out for that bottom 4 spot right now. And then you have in third, Sanderson Wayne. And I'll take a moment to talk about that for a second, because the chicken industry is around 50% consolidated by the top 4 players. In beef, it's more than 80%, which is all of these are astronomical. In pork, it's more than 70%. Antitrust experts talk about how if it's more than 20 to 25%, that's massively consolidated and probably too consolidated. And so these meat packers try to keep around between less than 25, but between 20 to 23 or 4% of market share per sector. And in chicken, it's been the least consolidated. Even so, when the book went to press, it was around 50% consolidated, which is still a huge amount, but
Yeah.
less than beef. And so there's been a little bit more room for new consolidation. And since the book went to press, it's now more than 60% consolidated, because Sanderson and Wayne Farms decided to merge, and there was some antitrust scrutiny on that merger for a while. But what ended up happening were, DOJ regulators essentially kind of made this deal, and these wage manipulation, wage fixing allegations that I was also talking about, then ended up influencing a consent decree that Sanderson and Wayne Farms and Cargill all signed so that the merger could go through. And so now this all just has happened in the past few weeks, few months, and it's led to more consolidation in the chicken industry and a massive new player that's shaking up the market.
Yeah, again, it's mind blowing to me. And again, this happens, as you pointed out, this happens very quickly, and it happens without little scrutiny, without little press, unless it's people like you who are writing about it.
Thanks. I just, it's really hard to even unpack in your own brain, or even to thinking about it, how intertwined all of this is and all these different complexities, and how they, snowball into so many different ramifications that impact our health, impact what we're getting in stores, and impact the environment.
Absolutely. So one of the things, Chloe, and I think you and I have talked about this before, one of the things that I was sort of, heartened by and hopeful about during the pandemic, is that for the first time, many consumers kind of understood. They heard the term supply chains for the first time, probably, in newspapers and in the nightly news, and they saw for the first time, sort of, how the sausage is made, because meat processing workers were getting COVID, and there were, front page articles in the New York Times and other publications about how, workers were being, offered incentives to work, being told they couldn't take sick days. We had the president of the United States at the time say that, these were essential workers, and they had to be working. That we couldn't, this country could not shut down meat processing plants. And I had hoped that would, really be something that would educate us all, create that awareness that was needed to show how unsustainable a lot of what you write about in the book actually is. That these these big meat companies, these processing plants are very, very fragile when we have a global shock, whether it's a pandemic or a conflict in another part of the world, or whatever happens. And so I'm wondering, were you hopeful? I'm less hopeful now about sort of that awareness and enlightenment, and I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I didn't want to make this a pandemic book. And the reason I had just the introduction go into this moment is because it was so catalyzing. I think it was such an enlightening a moment that people were so emotionally connected to. But at the same time, I was so worried that by the time this was coming out, that maybe some people were starting to forget, and that hopefully starting it off with that would kind of set the stage again to reignite some of that emotional energy around just how devastating this was, and also how much it could be with another crisis. I mean, the next superbug, the next pandemic could start on a factory farm, and that's a threat we live with every single day. And there really are so many different hands that touch the food and help us get the food that we eat. And so many of them are hidden because meat packers and other big corporations that have vested interests in keeping these super marginalized workers out of the spotlight. So I was hoping to pull back the curtain on that. And, I have a whole chapter on the human cost of eating meat for that reason. And someone had asked me once, I thought that would be around the public health concern, and the book does address that, but really that chapter is about the kind of patterns of discrimination and racism and violence and harassment that can happen at some of these plants. And again, we're talking about often workers who are refugees and some of the most vulnerable and marginalized folks in America. And so it can't be understated how important it is to shed a light on how this industry has squeezed them as well.
Absolutely. And it's kind of been based on those marginalized folks. It's been built on the backs
The
of
profits will have been.
absolutely. And that is what's so tragic about it. And again, thank you for writing this for a million different reasons. But I think that the inherent sort of racism, misogyny, sexism, harassment that you described is so inherent in this industry. And it's again something that not a lot of us know about.
No, and it really comes to life with some of the cases that I choose to go to. I mean, I looked at hundreds, thousands of different cases, but I chose them very specifically. One I'll briefly mention, a horrific class action from several years ago from a plant, a Pilgrim's Pride plant in Texas. Several different, many 17 plus different horrible stories, different instances, but one was the case of a woman on the line who was pregnant and ended up having a miscarriage after just horrific patterns of abuse at this plant, not being able to go to the bathroom, not getting simple things, beyond being able to work in dignity, not having the dignity that she deserves, and so many, all workers deserve, everyone deserves. So I chose them very specifically because each one tells a separate story, but they're all part of this pattern of violence, and also a pattern of even, some of these injuries and instances being ignored, or if not, then even having retaliation against them.
Yeah. Which is why it's not why workers don't speak up. It's why they can't speak up often, because they will lose their livelihoods. And so it's really important to highlight that. I want to move on a little bit and talk about, again, I don't think a lot of folks always understand the connections between our industrialized meat system, big meat, and the environmental costs of producing meat currently, the way we do currently.
Yeah, there's massive amounts of waste, kind of at all ends of the system. There's calorie inefficient waste in terms of how livestock get their feed, and the hidden costs around that. Talk about how feed is produced. Almost all feed is coming from corn and soy that's farmed with, chemical pesticides and fertilizers and different inputs that have been degrading soils, creating massive pollution issues in our waterways, creating dead zones in the Gulf of Mexico and in different lagoons and lakes across of fresh water too across the country. And so that's just on the feed side of things. There's also been just, the meat packers themselves and their trade organizations, their lobbying groups, taking a concerted effort to spend a significant amount of time and money and capital lobbying against Clean Water Act, Clean Air Act, key regulations that were put in place for consumers. And there's been an eating away of those regulations and policies over time to their benefit. And that's how we've really gotten into this mess to begin with. But then, also they've amassed all these profits based on the system where they can pollute and where they can have these negative environmental impacts that they don't have to worry about. But climate change really is going to be the reckoning that they're not ready for. Even aside from the extreme heat and extreme weather and different types of, storms and disasters that can happen, climate change and the heat makes these crops that they're now relying on that they don't really need to rely on. It makes them so much less nutritious. It's going to impact how much they're able to make. And especially it's going to impact how much farmers are able to really access, even on like a fundamental level. So
Absolutely.
it's a race to the bottom, and we'll see, but it's not looking pretty. And the meat packers have yet to address that fundamental question.
Yeah, it's interesting to me. You mentioned a reckoning around the climate crisis. You see so many companies sort of finally understanding that they need to change their practices or change some of their product lines or change, sort of fundamentally how they do business because the climate crisis is looming, because they understand that a younger generation of consumers does not want to support, unsustainable businesses anymore, at least, sort of in the global north. And I'm wondering why you think big meat hasn't sort of taken that on. You do see like companies like Cargill investing in alternative proteins, or Tyson, investing in alternative proteins or cultivated meats, or, some different product lines, but that's not enough to get us out of where we're going.
No, not at all. And there have been newer tests, pilots, examples that I can talk about. Tyson, for example, has been looking at sustainable feed, but it's still on like less than 5% of their total land that the feed is made on. It there's all these goals are so far out in the future and have still some pretty small programs. There's not really scale with these, and we really need to see these corporations take the risk that they need to, because they've been taking risks with all of our health and the environment for as long as they have been. But until 2020, there was barely any talk even of sustainability, I'd say, honestly, in the meat industry. And even looking at like oil and gas and that sector and how those companies would address like climate scenario risk analyses, that meat packers up until 2020, only 2 meat packers had done that publicly, Tyson and Marfrig. That was less than 5% of the whole industry. And oil and gas, more than 20+% of the industry had already done so by that point. And there was really just this shunting it off, pushing it off to the future. But we don't have the time to waste at this point. And
yeah. And you speak about pushing things off. I think a lot of onus is put on eaters and consumers to push for food system change. But there are limits, because as you've discussed before, a lot of us don't know where our meat comes from. It's not enough to just to tell everyone, okay, go vegan, because that's not sustainable in its own way. You've talked about the need for reducing meat consumption, and I'm wondering if you can sort of elaborate on that and help consumers understand how they can do that in a way where they feel like they're gaining something instead of losing something.
yeah, I mean, this is all about equity. And that's the reason why I wanted to tell this story. I wanted to start with talking about how billionaires have created fortunes through this meat industry, and now how equity has been stripped from farmers, and all the different ways that if we could spread out, equity more in the food system, that it would, be better for all of us and more accessible, and it would change the face of the protein industry. But, I really wanted to address the fundamental questions around how we've all been beat over the head a bit that we can vote with our dollars, but really we have no ability to do so when billionaires and these institutional structures have shaped what we are able to access so much more than what our $1 as a single consumer can do. I mean, it's really a false messiah to think that you really can vote with our dollars. And that's not to say that we can't, take an active role in our food system and make sure that that dollar we're using is felt to the farmers or to the institutions that we really want to be supporting. But I really wanted to talk about the equity and talk about how demand can be manufactured. I mean, it talks about lab grown meat or cultivated meat too, for example, and how there are so many billionaires involved and different retailers and other big investors involved in getting that to market far before it will be actually commercially and financially sustainable to do so. And they're going to be putting out a lot of products at a significant financial loss, and they're planning on doing that in a way, again, potentially manufacturing demand for this product that hasn't been able to prove themselves but is getting billions of dollars, whereas billions of dollars could be also going towards re-regionalizing the food system or towards local producers and how to get infrastructure stronger to support purveyors and regional food systems.
Yeah, a lot needs to happen. And again, I feel for consumers. I mean, we're all consumers who are on this call, but I feel for consumers who have to go into the grocery store, go online and make these decisions without knowing sort of what's behind what they're eating.
There's so much guilt being put on consumers, and it needs to be put on government regulators and on the corporate actors, because also there's just so much privilege involved in even being able to figure out the research and time it takes to figure out what is greenwash and what isn't, and what actually is something good to produce, support, and what is just going to be going to a billionaire backed venture capital firm at the end of the day. And our options have been so skewed with an Amazon backed Whole Foods that's now selling like hard seltzers and things that you'd never see on the shelves there 20 years ago. But it's not all bad. Labels can be helped. I mean, and I think I really just hope to see less guilt, less onus being put on the consumer, because it's impossible for consumers to compete and to counterbalance manufactured demand, in part fueled by billionaires.
Yeah. Continuing sort of on that theme of blame, a lot of blame has been placed on farmers and ranchers, which I think is always, not the right thing to do. It's always wrong, because often when we're talking about some of these big operations, these big CAFOs, industrialized farms, factory farms, whatever term everyone is most comfortable with, these farmers have often been pushed into doing this because of loans or subsidies, or encouraged by their local extension agent as the way to go, and now they're caught in a vicious cycle that is very difficult to get out of, because you've invested in massive infrastructure, massive animal factories to some extent. And I'm wondering how we can sort of reduce that blame on farmers, and also find ways where farmers can make a living where they don't have to be involved in industrial animal agriculture.
Absolutely. The key is creating other pathways and clearer pathways to have financial success, because farming and ranchers and producers have had their equity stripped away over time. I mean, there are many different figures and examples I talk about in the book, aside from the collusion allegations and different schemes and different lawsuits that the book goes into. There are, simple cases of these meat, the meat that we're getting, coming from, how do I say this, such problematic systems. But I think it's important to be having these conversations.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, no, and that's why again, I mean, I can't sell this book enough. This is a really important book. And I get a lot of books from a lot of different authors and a lot of different journalists, but this is, a book that like we all as eaters should read because these issues are so complex. Chloe is very easy to read and engaging. It is not, technical in the sense that it's written by, a scientist, but technical in terms of breaking these things down and really helping, take you on a journey as an eater, as somebody who cares about where our food comes from, to give you the tools that you need to be able to eat differently. And I think that's really important, but also the tools that you need to change how the system works. And so that sort of leads me, Chloe, to Food Tank and to other nonprofits and civil society groups. What is our role in helping inform, not just inform eaters, but inform the conversation so that the systems, the inherent racist, misogynist systems that have been in place that have allowed industrial agriculture to prey on immigrant populations, to prey on refugee populations, to prey on us as consumers, to break that and to truly transform our food systems to something that is more sustainable.
Yeah, I see member-based, action-based organizations like Food Tank, like others, as being that almost hopeful counterbalance, that optimistic counterbalance for accurate information to counterbalance the lobbyists from top meat packers from industry that's been, using their money to squeeze producers and to, erode in the environment over time. I think writing letters and advocating, campaigning, as you all do, is so important because there is so much crazy, wrong, problematic information out there coming from sources that have vested interests and hiding the truth. And the more that can be shared, I think the hope is that we'll be able to actually start having real conversations at the very
Absolutely.
least.
Around those same lines, are there policies that civil society can support right now, especially in the United States?
Yeah, land access for farmers, number one, is again a counterbalance to some of the corporatization of farmland and how that has again stripped wealth and equity from farmers that shouldn't be blamed. That's a clear one. Another clear one is, having a frank conversation with how subsidies work in this country and how incentives work and how farmers and the farmers that are growing what ends up becoming the animal feed for this industry that has such an unsustainable path in the future, how they are not incentivized at all to support more sustainable practices, not even talking about going organic, although that would be amazing, or not even talking about doing non-GMO, or that'd be amazing. Obviously there's a lot of different organic, non-GMO. It's a whole separate conversation, but talking about prairie strips can be put on even industrialized farms and significantly improve results in water erosion, soil erosion, different issues. And that's just one example. Cover crops still on a tiny percentage of total acreage, but why is crop insurance and other subsidies that are given to farmers not requiring cover crops or other clear incentives? I think we need to first realign the finances and the financial institutions and the loans with actual sustainable practices and what is proven scientifically, not what is just greenwashed.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, I heard Senator Cory Booker speak at the Milken Institute yesterday, and he called for a moratorium on factory farming, and that's something that you believe in as well.
Absolutely. I think that's another clear avenue to start. I mean, that call has been coming from the UN and different public health organizations and different, even some government bodies like the CDC for a long time, although it really has never been taken seriously and addressed and actually put into policy and put in place. The threat of antibiotic resistance alone a moratorium factory farming would help, I think would be enormous. I mean, antibiotic resistance is this hidden public health threat for everyone, but also specifically for the workers. And I can go into that a little more, but also you have on the environmental level, then you have antibiotics getting into waterways as well, also degrading soils even further, making soils have less nutrients, like making them less effective. And yeah, that's just, again, one example of just how the moratorium on factory farming would drive impacts
Yeah.
across the system.
I want to take a step back because I don't think a lot of folks truly understand sort of, why CAFOs or factory farms are kind of petri dishes for the emergence of disease. And I'm wondering if you can explain. Now, I know folks have seen videos, and have whatever viewpoints that they do around meat production. But why are factory farms kind of an incubator for the threat of zoonotic diseases or diseases that are spread from animals to humans?
Because there are so many animals being forced to live in confinement without good access to air or other natural elements, they have to be given a certain level of vaccination and antibiotics just to not get sick in that sort of environment. But on top of that, these animals are also being given antibiotics, often to promote growth. That's something that was phased out over time, or it was tried to be phased out over time through policy and different regulation. But it still is a way that drives growth, and it is still used in several areas. And so anytime an antibiotic is used, it creates more antibiotic resistance, is the short of it. And this is very, very personal. It's not just this kind of looming hidden threat of 10 million plus people dying annually. It's also for any worker, anyone who's ever been in a plant like this. I speak with Lance Price, who I know is a food tank fellow as well, and a biological entomologist who has been at the forefront of covering some of this, though often hidden but deadly impacts of superbugs. I'm one of the journalists who's been in a lot of different slaughterhouses over time, but few have. And for me, or for anyone who's even working a shift at a plant over a summer or for a short period when they were coming just briefly through America as they were immigrating, you don't realize that just being in those plants once or multiple times, you can contract a superbug, and you might not get sick then. You could get sick, may never get sick, or you can get sick years, decades in the future. And it could be a situation where there's a single piece of inflammation, or you have some sort of inflammation, a virus or a pneumonia, and you're in the hospital, and all of a sudden that superbug gets ignited. And then all of a sudden that pneumonia downward spirals extremely quickly. And it's now an antibiotic resistant disease that you're not able to treat. And those deaths are often also barely recorded, and workers, again, signing up for a shift over a summer or just in a brief time of transience, we truly have no idea that could live with them for the rest of their lives.
Yeah. So tragic, and really, explains why we need to transform our industrial food systems for the better. So thank you. I do want to end, there are lots of questions in the Q&A function, and I'll have people raise their hands too. So I want to get to the Q&A. But before we do that, I just want to end on something hopeful. And I wonder what gives you, as the author of this book, as a journalist who writes about food and agriculture issues constantly, this is all you think about. And I'm wondering what gives you hope about our food and agriculture systems.
My optimism is limited, but I do have optimism. I have optimism every time I work a shift at my CSA. And I don't know, it's the community supported, membership based organizations that I think are going to be the fabric of what helps us all survive these future climate crises in dignity. And so I get really happy when I, even see the crisis already happening, like when the CSA truck broke down and we all had to get the boxes one by one and have a line to move them up to where they needed to be, and to then be able to actually distribute from our farm share. There are so many different ways and beautiful different organic interactions that come from just being a part of a membership, a thriving membership neighborhood community group. And I would love to see that on a super, super, super micro level, but also I'd love to see that as a re-regionalized level, and really interrogating how infrastructure and, programs are supporting the future resilience of how we all eat. And I think now's the time. What gets me optimistic and excited is the fact that it's now or never. So here we go.
Yeah, the urgency is there, but we can all be part of this change. Part of that happens with reading Chloe's book, Raw Deal. Whether you borrow, beg it, or steal it, read this book because it's really wonderful. So I want to get to some questions in the chat, and again, if people can use the raise their hand function in the conversation, I can also call on you. So I want to start with Mark H. He said, can Chloe give us any kind of update on the Biden administration's work on trust busting in the big meat industry? Is any progress being made on breaking up any of the big four meat producers? And we did discuss that, but I'm wondering where you think the administration is headed.
They've been trying to kind of deal at this point. I think that chicken merger I talked about in the beginning is a really good example of, they could have sued to halt that merger entirely, but they did not. Maybe someone would have said that was the wrong choice, but they decided to then, take this investigation into wage manipulation and allegations that they'd been doing for the past year, and use that as an opportunity to get some real solid changes court ordered through that. And so you're seeing that, but there's still consolidation happening. There was a JBS acquisition this week even. So you continue to see this, but there also is a point where there is limiting amounts of what future acquisitions can look like. You can't really unscramble the eggs that have been scrambled, but there also really isn't a statute of limitations on it. So, it depends. You've had a DOJ and a FTC that have been hiring so many different antitrust folks who are really expensive. And so they're going to want to see a return on that investment.
Yeah.
But right now you've also seen the US government have some pretty embarrassing failures over the past year and a half with the criminal case with, multiple 10 plus different poultry executives that were going to trial and went to 3 different mistrials before they gave up and acquitted everyone over price fixing. So there's been some wins on the civil side, but also a lot of money and a lot of kind of embarrassment on the criminal side of this.
I'll get to folks who are raising their hand in a second. I just want to get through some of these in the chat. So Moss asks, is there anything small producers, ranchers can do to impact the system? As a small organic farmer, there are times I feel helpless. Hope you can offer some light at the end of the tunnel.
My gosh, no, do not feel helpless. You are exactly what we need to be, who we need to be supporting, the types of communities that we need to be supporting. And I think that I would love to talk to you after this about what you want to see and how you want to see this all change, and what would be most helpful to you. But no, I think, starting a CSA if you don't have one, trying to start doing some local advocacy. Maybe you should join a local local politics board yourself. I think it's going to be up to everyone, and you're already doing a lot. So, also farming is very hard work. I'm not to say that you need to do any more, but
no, those are great points. And I think something that local, and regional farmers and ranchers can think about is what Chloe alluded to, getting involved with your local school board, for example, where you can influence procurement. Mm-hmm. And if schools just procured, more regional and local meat producers, that could impact the industry so significantly. So it's a really good suggestion. And I do hope, I know farmers have so much on their plates, but having more farmers and holding, whether it's local or national legislative positions, I think is really important as well.
Or even positions like the board of a local credit union. I read about credit unions a lot, being able to support especially more vulnerable farmers and producers, and how that can be used as a counterbalance to.
That's great. That's great. So, Robert L asks and he says he bought the book
Thank you,
and he
Robert.
wants to know before he gets into it, what is the state of unionization in this industry? The state of how unions are being organized.
Well, Robert, I think you'll actually be pleasantly surprised that there is some really interesting stuff from unions in the book. I spoke with the UFCW and many other unions in RWTSU, but UFCW's, particularly their meatpacking head, is quoted a fair amount in the book. And I won't give away why too much, but unions are super important because again, these workers are so vulnerable. The situation though is, I read about wage manipulation, especially in the chicken industry. Chicken is the least unionized of any of the meat sectors. Beef is the most, but they also have the least contractors. So it all kind of evens out. Well, not evens out, but every sector is different. Pork has a lot of unionization. Beef has a lot of unionization. Almost all of it is UFCW. Almost all plants is maybe 80, 70. It's very close to almost all the plants are. But it also, it still doesn't fully protect workers. There are, unfortunately, again, these patterns of violence and harassment and discrimination. The unions are often advocating for these workers too, obviously, and that's they're important. Work continue to see horrible reports about injuries that didn't happen, but that keep happening.
Absolutely, and giving workers the opportunity to collectively all that, when we're food the food industry as a whole, it's not just important for meat workers, although it's for all workers, and we're so much ability to organize and make change in whether it's Starbucks or Applebee's or whoever is going to be protesting next week. It's really important for workers to have that voice. So Tracy Stuckrath raised her hand. We'll give her a minute to get on screen with the help of Elena, our contact
and in
director.
the meantime too, I'll just say that especially farm workers need to have better access to unionization. And my book goes into that a little bit, and also in terms of how farmer markets work.
So Tracy, are you there? Are you muted maybe? We can't hear you. There you are, in the car and muted.
Okay.
There you go.
Hi. So thank you so much for listening to me while I drive. And Dana, you're going to be on my show in a couple of weeks, and I want to talk about some of this as well. But Chloe, I'm a meeting planner, and there are the meeting planners in the U.S. spend about $64 billion on food and beverage every year, and I want to kind of understand how the industrial side of hotel procurement and convention center procurement around meat, chicken and beef and pork, can actually be impacted. We don't have any industry organization, and maybe I need to make myself one, that can lobby for this. So I'm wondering how planners who are spending $64 billion a year on food can actually make an impact.
That's a great question. Institutions are one of the ways that this industry, industrial meat industry is being propped up, because almost everything you're getting in a cafeteria or a food service restaurant, like large scale hotel type catering situation, almost all of it is from these feedlots and problematic systems of production. And so there are some distributors, it's so hard working at event spaces when they dictate who you work with and what type of food you can get. But the clearest way really is to have stricter standards around local sourcing in place. and more incentivized on like a policy, federal, local, state, political level.
Kind of like you were talking about the billionaires in the industry, there's billionaires in this industry too that are forcing that, the buying power. Exactly. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Tracy. Please drive carefully. I appreciate you. I'm going to be, I'm going to pick favorites from the list of comments because one is from my husband, who's an agricultural economist. And he says, we're hooked on cheap meat. And when we're hooked, we blame the consumer. And that goes back centuries, alcohol and tobacco, older example, opioids more recently. And he says, when there's a combination of externalities and asymmetric information, nerdy economists speak, it's the regulator's role to make things right. Otherwise, our default is to blame the end user. And so William Bill says, thank you for your book. It helps balance the asymmetry and holds rule makers accountable.
Thank you so much. I don't think more needs to be said, but I think corporate accountability at the end of the day is the driving theme, and it is the question, and it all comes back to shareholder returns and fiduciary duty and some of the legal and underpinnings of all of this. But that is what needs to change and starts with corporate accountability.
Absolutely. So Eric J asks, Chloe, totally appreciate the expose of bad actors. Did you have a chance to also discuss alternative models that specifically address the issues you have raised? For example, Lawrence Meats in Cannon Falls, Minnesota.
I don't talk to Lawrence Meats, although I'd love to hear from them. I think the book is called Raw Deal because unfortunately right now I see a raw deal on all levels here, just from an accessibility perspective and from a perspective of what out there from alternatives is so ultra processed or is so, it takes so much privilege to afford actually, good meat that is made in a more ethical and sustainable situation. But I do explore many alternative challengers on the meat side of things, and also on the plant-based and mushroom side of things, on some of the more tech side. This chapter on lab meat, I try to discuss all of the kind of emerging challengers and what financial structures are also underpinning them and the equity around it as well.
Mushrooms, so exciting what's happening with mycelium and everything. Absolutely. Not just done as being an alternative, but like alternative leathers and all of these cool things that are happening. So Penny asks, what about China buying Smithfield? Are they being held to any standards with food processing?
No, but I love this question too, because there is a whole section in one of my chapters specifically dedicated to climate change about how WH Group and Wen Long, the billionaire who's behind WH Group, which acquired Smithfield, in, by the way, one of the biggest foreign acquisitions of a corporation in America in history, and how that is driving further environmental destruction. And there's just this massive misalignment of incentives and what's happening. So I think you'll like that part, because no, not much is being addressed in terms of their accountability, but serious ramifications.
Naomi S., and this will have to be our last question, says she was studying sustainable animal production at Wageningen University, and one of the folks, Imke de Boer, said that the optimum incorporation of animals in a balanced food system is in the 20 to 27% range. And I should mention that Imke is a food system visionary from the Rockefeller Foundation, who was identified by the Rockefeller Foundation as a food system visionary. So Naomi's asking, how can we get governments to transition to a sane system? We need a new generation of farmers.
We do need a new approach to everything. We need a new, I don't want to say it, we don't need a new deal. We had a new deal many years ago, but we need a different deal. That's for sure. Meat production has to fundamentally change. And I write a lot about how the corporations and the executives that are almost, foaming at the mouth, they're so excited about how demand projections continue to increase and to continue to grow around the world, how that all needs to change, and how, things like a moratorium on feedlots, moratorium on new growth. I mean, it can get as extreme as I think you can imagine. But also it fundamentally starts with simple things like the federal government not buying meat for public school children from JBS and Tyson. Simple as that.
Absolutely. Thank you. Chloe, I have enjoyed this conversation so much. I have enjoyed hearing from Food Tank members who are so engaged on this issue and feel obviously very passionate about it. So thank you, Chloe, so much. Thank you for your book. I want to take just the next minute to thank our members, my co-founder Bernard Pollock and I. You know, we've run this organization for almost 10 years now, and we could not do it without you. And from the very beginning, from the very beginning, there's been so much support from all of you. And again, I really, really appreciate the interaction that you have with me personally when I see you at events, when you write me, and especially when you criticize what we do, because that's what we need. We need your interaction. I love the praise, as I've said before, but I also love the criticism because it helps us do better. So thank you, thank you, thank you. I hope you all have a healthy and happy holiday season, and I can't wait to see you all in the new year. Thank you so much. Bye, everyone.